What's up, everybody? It's Izzy from PowerliftingToWin and from IzzyNarvez.com, and I am here today with Broderick Chavez from Team Evil GSP, and we are both extremely excited to be talking to you about the truth when it comes to the differences between training for natural and enhanced athletes. So we wanted to cover some of the most popular topics here, including training volume, frequency, intensity, and even something like mesocycle length. So how we're going to do this is I've got quite a bit of experience kind of on the natural side of the equation and also some opinions as well as to what I've seen with enhanced athletes. And I'm going to put forward some ideas, and then Broderick's going to come in with his immense experience having worked with tons of elite enhanced athletes from IFBB pro bodybuilders, guys at the top of the sport, to give his opinion on what the actual differences are between training when you're natural versus enhanced. Because as we both agreed before this interview, there's a lot of crap out there. So, Broderick, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we get started?
No, Izzy, that was a great intro, and you covered it, and you're right. There's just a lot of garbage out there that we have to talk about. And the only thing I will say, and for those that don't know me, this is relevant both to what you said and to making this conversation what it's going to be. And that is, you said you have a lot of experience in the natural realm. I, in fact, have none. I just want everyone to be super aware of that every single thing that I say is going to be from the perspective and the context of, and I'm assuming or I'm expecting that person to be using drugs. I personally began using pharmacology at age 16. I'm approaching 50. I've been doing this personally and professionally basically my entire life. So I just wanted to connotate that so that if somebody gets a funny look on their face, they just have to know that it's because when I say anything, it's under the guise of I'm assuming drugs are involved.
Absolutely. And it's great that you mentioned that, because I think it kind of works out almost opposite for me. And that out of maybe like the 300 powerlifters that I've coached from the time I was running PowerliftingToWin, maybe 5% were enhanced. It just didn't, I wasn't enhanced, so I didn't attract very many enhanced lifters, and that's just kind of how it goes. So I think it's a great melting of different perspectives. With that said, I think, we should go ahead and get right into it. I think the first topic that a lot of people like to obsess about when it comes to this is the training frequency of natural versus enhanced athletes. And I don't know if you would agree with this, Broderick, but my perception of what I see out there in the lifting community is that most people believe that naturals either can or should be training more often than enhanced athletes. Do you have any thoughts on that right off the bat?
Well, what I didn't mention in the intro is my background is actually biology. I am legally or pedigree-wise a biologist. So I have more than a little passing knowledge on basic muscle physiology, exercise physiology, and I think what most people there are referencing is protein expression curves. In a natural, protein expression curves are typically something like 24 to 36 hours post-workout, and then they begin to decline. So the window of time that they make muscle is relatively limited. So the thinking is doing that more frequently would continue that curve in a more protracted fashion. The opposite side of the coin is, and a good friend of mine, Lyle McDonald, always loves to focus on one study that showed 600 milligrams a week of testosterone developed as much muscle as a natural actually lifting weights. Yeah. And that's 600 milligrams of testosterone without exercise. So the moral of the story is the drugs extend the protein expression curves, making it seem, at least on topically and logically, like less frequency would be necessary and maybe even desirable. So that's what I would say on a professional intellectual level. What I would say on the personal and professional as a coach level, I would say that my experience lines up with that perfectly from the drug enhanced point of view. I have no idea what naturals are doing or why, because I don't even know any. But drug enhanced athletes can train frequently, but most of the time do not.
And what I would say from the natural side is that, especially when I look at like a lot of IPF lifters, there is a tendency towards much higher frequencies. And I think that there's two things at play there. One, I think is actually just like pop culture. High frequency is sexy and popular right now. And that in and of itself is going to drive a lot of people to do it. And then those that have the genetics to excel with that template will come to have success during this time period. And then people will look to emulate them. So they'll look, the confirmation bias will be run rampant, and they will see the guys that are training very frequently and want to copy that. However, it doesn't mean it's for everybody, and there's been champions, natural or otherwise, that have very low frequencies. And the second thing I think is very important about this is the size of the lifter, and it's kind of a two-part thing for me. The size of the lifter in terms of the total muscle mass, but also in terms of their range of motion and what their techniques are like. So let me kind of explain that. I've seen that larger natural lifters, so guys like, let's say in the 120 kilo class or the unlimited class, they do not train fundamentally differently in terms of frequency from enhanced athletes of a similar level of muscle mass. So what I've seen is the larger and more male you are, the less frequency that you probably should do. It seems that these guys regress and literally overreach and overtrain almost within 2-3 weeks when you have some guy with an 800-pound squat trying to squat 3 times a week, unless the intensities are extraordinarily low, like in the 50-60% type of thing, which most naturals aren't doing. So the other part of that I see is that, let's say you have, a 5'4" male in the 132-pound weight class who does sumo deadlifts with his toes all the way out to the plates. This is going to be an extremely short range of motion, and it's not comparable to a 5'11" athlete who has his toes out to the plates, because the implement doesn't change size for the lifter. So scaled, relatively speaking, it's still a more extreme version of the movement. So what I've seen is that these types of lifters, whether it's the huge arch and a wide grip on the bench press, they tend to be able to do and even need to do more frequency because they're getting less overall systemic stress per repetition. So
what would biologically be referred to as inroad. They're making a much shallower inroad into their homeostatic level or their potential recovery level per workout. Therefore, they need more workouts to accumulate the same level of fatigue.
Absolutely. So that's what I've seen time and time again. When you get whether it's a male or a female in the 120 to 160 pound kind of range with these extreme techniques, especially in powerlifting, the higher frequency templates work better and seem to be necessary. However, you start trying to apply that to some 6'1", 280 pound guy who's, even if he goes all the way out to the rings, it's still more of a medium grip bench press. That will destroy him in a matter of days, whether it's tendinitis or injuries. It just doesn't seem to work. And I personally actually believe that these factors are more relevant than whether somebody is natural or enhanced. It's the lifter size and their technique. But then on top of what you're saying as well, from the biological perspective, that probably it's even beneficial to train less because of that extended muscle protein synthesis curve. You just get less wear and tear for the same amount of hypertrophy.
And there's one other little drug-driven factor that I will throw in there. There's a great deal of research from the 50s and 60s on androgens at large that show androgens have a meaningful impact on skill and skill acquisition and motor learning. And because of that, theoretically, the more drugs you use, the less frequently you need to refine your technique, or the less frequently you have to practice a refined technique. Therefore, again, you could make the argument that athletes of lower androgen levels, i.e. naturals, and then even on the scale of naturals, from the gifted to the ungifted, you could make the argument that the lower the androgen levels, the more frequently they should practice their skill.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And I think one weird little exception that it's not little even, but one exception we should probably talk about that you mentioned to me before is that of Olympic lifters, and the fact that we have the Bulgarian system where some of them are maxing out every single day. So I think some people would be interested in hearing, and you give a really good explanation, so I kind of would like to turn this one over to you. But why is that the case if what we're saying is true, that you probably don't need to train as often and you can build just as much muscle with less frequency? What's going on there?
Well, there's a number of things going on there. The first and foremost thing, and I mean this is zero besmirch to Olympic lifters, I actually thought in the beginning of this life I was going to be one until I realized that I had no speed and little tiny hands. But nonetheless, I have the utmost respect for Olympic lifters. But the key thing to remember is Olympic lifting is much more historically and physiologically associated with track and field events than it is actual strength events. It is a speed, skill, coordination event that happens to have a measurable volume of strength, not the other way around. Powerlifting is a strength sport that has a little bit of speed and technique involved.
Yeah.
So in Olympic lifting, yes, the goal is getting stronger, but the key is getting stronger within a very technically specific algorithm, and therefore the skill is actually first. And a lot of Olympic lifters are purely using drugs to improve their recovery so that they can simply practice the act of Olympic lifting much more often.
Right. And then, yeah, so the lesson there is it's just different sports with different demands. And one sport has the skill component as the primary demand, and powerlifting, let's face it, is
100%.
It might be it's a very distant third at best behind strength and hypertrophy.
Absolutely. The comparison I use when I give my my talks in front of crowds is, obviously steroids were in baseball. We had that big thing, steroids in baseball. We had a Congress, all that. Okay. For instance, a pitcher using steroids, it's not to get stronger. I'm stronger than any baseball pitcher, but I can't pitch a baseball worth a fuck. Okay. The reason, for instance, baseball pitchers were using steroids is he who throws the most balls probably throws the best ball. So they were using it purely as a recovery modality to raise their daily pitching number from, say, 70 or 80 to 100, 120. They got commensurately better because they could just simply do more work.
Right. I think that actually segues kind of interestingly into the next variable that everybody likes to talk about, which is training volume. So if we have, Olympic lifters and baseball players who are using performance-enhancing drugs to basically just practice the sport more, it's an interesting discussion that comes up where people kind of get in this argument as to whether or not enhanced lifters can and should train with more volume than naturals. And I think that there's a kind of a similar thing at play there, where when you start to compare the two populations, where there's a lot of times people are comparing apples to oranges, where they'll take a 150-pound natural lifter who needs a certain level of volume and then compare him to Eric Lillybridge, this 300-pound power lifter, and say, well, look, this 148-pound IPF gold medalist does triple the volume of Eric Lillybridge. So if steroids let you do more volume, then why isn't that happening? And it's just, I think, a little silly because they're just too far apart.
There's yet another factor there, and again, going back to the exercise physiology, for a natural, there's arguments, we could talk Lyle McDonald versus Mike Israetel versus Brian Schoenfeld. There's a little bit of argument, but the argument's relatively narrow in that the sweet spot for effective intensity being weight on the bar, okay, not, I'm trying really hard, proper terms. Intensity is, load on the bar. The naturals typically see their hypertrophic response somewhere between, say, 70 and 85, maybe 65 and 85% of 1 RM max. We can argue a little on that, but what I'm arguing is that it's a relatively narrow sliver of the percentage range. That's the zone that seems to work for naturals. And because of that, all of their volume is pigeonholed into that range, or it's ineffective. The magic of anabolics and pharmacological aids across the board is, one, every single repetition does give you more results, yes, but even more importantly is the effective zone of training expands radically. It's been shown now in many recent studies that as low as 35% of 1 RM under the influence of drugs can drive hypertrophy. So now you've got this situation where your hypertrophy zone goes from 30% to 100%, whereas a natural can only work in 65 to 85. So literally, for instance, using Eric Littlewood, I don't want to throw him under the bus, but we're going to assume that he's our prototypical, giant, super strong, probably drug-using athlete. All of his warm-ups, all of his sets, literally basically every single weight he touches counts toward valid, effective volume.
Yeah.
That has an enormous difference on the total collected volume he's doing in a week, because at least half of his volume isn't even reported. I know this for myself. Just carrying my big ass around is probably a hypertrophic stimulus, just because I'm just too goddamn heavy.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I used to work out with a guy. His name's Justin Randall. He was a near 900 pounds raw squatter, and just to get up to his working weights, it was 7 sets.
Oh yeah, easily.
Throw a plate on and do 5 to 8 reps every single one. I didn't think it was a very intelligent warm up, but it's what he did. He'd do 135 for like 10, 225 for 8, 315 for 8, 405 for 6. 500 for 5, 600 for 3, and then maybe he'd start doing something in his working weight range. And by the time you've done that, that's more than most people's total volume.
100%. If you actually use the equation of weight times reps times sets, he's lifted 20,000 pounds before he even does a working set.
And a lot of the work that Schoenfeld's done with some of these like lower intensity ranges, the caveat for the trainees that they use, the natural trainees, is that it had to go close to failure or to failure.
Correct.
And so that, I think, is the real big difference that we're talking about here, whereas there's this caveat with pretty much all natural training that if you're below, let's say, an RPE 6 or 4 reps in reserve, the set is almost non-consequential. It just doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of systemic stress unless it gets very, very large, like say a Shaco type program where you do so many of those that eventually that RPE does creep up by the end. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting point to make, and it kind of bleeds into that third variable of intensity, where you make the point that I don't think a lot of people make often, is that the effective intensity is much, much larger for enhanced lifters. And kind of anecdotally, the funny thing that I see with that is like sometimes you'll watch IFBB pro bodybuilders doing like dumbbell exercises with 15s and 20s, and they seem to grow from it, and it's almost unbelievable because that just doesn't seem like it would work for anyone else. I think some people have talked about it, pump and fluff type workouts that do seem to be effective under the right pharmacological circumstances.
Correct. And some of those conditions are just simply that also they're super, super hypercaloric. And one of the other benefits of drugs is that they tend to fight fat retention. So you're able to eat these absurd calorie loads without gaining body fat. And some of those absurd calorie loads then play into protein synthesis curves and anabolic zones and all of that. So there's more than a little bit to it, but you're absolutely correct on that.
Interesting. Yeah. So I guess that kind of we kind of tackled volume and intensity there all at once. Do you have any do you have a succinct kind of soundbite or for your thoughts on the whole volume for enhanced lifters versus this perception that they should be doing more volume or they can? What are
Well, I'll try and do my best to give you a soundbite. I'm not notorious for being poignant or succinct. I tend to ramble. But Dr. Mike Israetel is a very good friend of mine. We communicate regularly, and he has very much, and I believe very correctly, propagated the idea that volume is king, and roughly speaking, the more volume you can do, the better you'll progress. That's absolutely accurate, but the caveat I would put on that is most people, once fitness is achieved, once leanness is achieved, once your work capacity is achieved, they have no extra ability to find volume. It's not hiding in their pockets. They don't have any more. The way you get the ability to tolerate more volume, is introduce drugs. Drugs exacerbate your ability to tolerate volume. So volume is the major driver of hypertrophy, but the major driver of volume is drugs. So vis-a-vis, I would say drugs are the major driver of hypertrophy, but I'm that guy.
Right. And I do think that there is one interesting distinction to be made there between physique competition and strength sport, because I think they trend in different directions as far as the volumes that you see performed by the people at the top of the sport. So in the physique world, from what I've seen, and you can correct me if your perception is different, is that if you look at your average enhanced bodybuilder versus a natural bodybuilder, the enhanced bodybuilder will be doing volumes that blow them out of the water. Just programs that almost look stupid, like you shouldn't be able to recover from it. And they get results from that. Whereas on, let's say, the world that I'm more familiar with, which is the programming of powerlifters, it almost goes the other direction, where a lot of the top enhanced powerlifters are doing, they're not doing tons and tons and tons of sets and drop sets and death sets and giant sets with their various accessory exercises. It's more and if anything, they actually don't go heavy as often as naturals do.
Absolutely. I think that relative intensity applied to the bar is lower almost in every case when drug users are involved. But the thing I would point out is, going back to your initial premise that it largely just comes down to athlete size, I think that's what comes into play here. Is I think this argument, no, we're not having an argument, but this dialogue really only applies to the middle of the bell curve. Beginners can do fucking anything. And then the middle of the bell curve is this conversation we're having. When you get to the Ed Cohn, Bill Kazmaier, Eric Lillibridge end of the bell curve, things change again radically, simply because the damage done per repetition, no matter what percentage they're using, 50% Eric Lillibridge's squat is still enough to kill everyone in the middle of that bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the two ends of that really just need to be ignored, at least for this dialogue.
Yeah, and it is interesting, too, because speaking of, again, Eric Lillibridge, or even you can take a guy like Stan Efferding, who when he set his world records, he was using a similar style to the Lillibridges. If I remember correctly, he was actually training with them. And what they do is they actually alternate going heavy on the squat one week and then heavy on the deadlift the next week. And there's tons of anecdotes of similar types of training, whether it's Tom Platz only going heavy twice a month for
Ernie France.
Yeah, tons of this. Or the first 1,000-pound deadlifter, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name, Andy Bolton. If you look at his...
No, well, yeah, he was the first 1,000. But I apologize. I'm so much older than you. I jumped ahead to the first 900-pound deadlifter, Doyle Kennedy. Was what I thought was going to come out. I apologize.
Yeah. So if you look at Andy Bolton's training program for when he actually pulled that 1,000-pound deadlift, a lot of it is 60%. He went heavy less than once a month, even.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of like the whole Olympic lifting thing is this weird exception that's kind of explained by skill. We get to a certain point where the poundages being lifted by some of the elite strength sport athletes, the enhanced ones, are so immense that there's a different set of rules at play for the recovery curves that just don't apply. It's the bodybuilding rules and the powerlifting rules at the top of the two sports don't work together that well anymore.
Agreed.
Yeah. The last thing, I guess, that we have on the agenda is a point that I hadn't even really considered well enough, especially before you brought it up, was mesocycle length. So you have some very interesting thoughts on this as far as mesocycle length for enhanced lifters versus natural lifters.
I absolutely do. And again, I mentioned, I don't want to keep dropping his name, but he's such a figure in the industry. He's easy to name drop. Dr. Mike Israetel is a very good friend of mine, and we have this conversation endlessly about mesocycle length. And his product, the RP product and what have you, is very much targeted to the lower to middle end of that bell curve. And so he typically touts maybe a 3 to 4, maybe a 5-week escalation, then a deload, and et cetera. And to me and the people that I deal with on a daily level, I have PB pros, top powerlifters, top Olympic lifters, top 100-meter, track and field type people. A 5-week mesocycle is a fucking goof. Like that's nothing. It's inconsequential. I remember, talking, Dr. Fred Hatfield and things, literally laying out a 12-week linear peak. No back-offs, no nothing. Well, it all comes down to the conversation we've had through this 20 minutes, half hour. One, drugs improve recovery. Recovery is basically the reason you would need rest. We covered that.
Yeah.
Drugs also improve motor learning and skill acquisition. And that's relevant to that in that one of the things that fatigues is your neurological, psychological, emotional component breaks down, leading to skill breakdowns, which then lead to training traumas and problems. So if you have an advantage in your motor patterns, you have less damage per set and rep, plus you have heightened recovery abilities. You see where this is going. It's heading off into the distance. My experience is a really well and truly enhanced athlete should not need a down week. Absolute earliest 8 weeks, normally 10 to 12 weeks.
Yeah, and I think that the standard out there right now, and it is easy to pick on Mike's ideas a little bit, but let's face it, he's kind of been at the forefront of redefining how people think about volume for the last 2 years.
100%.
Is 4 to 6 weeks. And what I typically have used a lot with natural athletes is very similar. There's kind of two styles out there that I think right now. One of them is more kind of like Lau McDonald, the Eric Helms type of approach, where there's a certain amount of volume that's done, and then the progression, both in volume and throughout each week of the mesocycle, is more so done on the absolute intensity level, meaning that they add weight to the bar, and however long it can be sustained is the mesocycle length. Whereas Mike's approach is more volume driven, and it's going to be adding sets week to week. And that tends to be the approach that I take as well. And what I've done with naturals is, it won't be a deload, but it will be a reload every fourth week where we bring back the sets a little bit, drop the intensity, and then build back up again to near their MRV and kind of repeat that through 4-week cycles. And it's funny because if you actually bring together everything that we've talked about, number one, the intensity range expanding, that allows you to start lower, which
100%
immediately extends the possibilities for cycle length right away. Then you talk about a higher recovery peak. That gives you the possibility for a bigger MRV, which extends it on the other side. And then the other thing I think that's a little bit overlooked, or maybe that needs to be focused on a little bit more, is the fact that when you are able to use lower frequencies, the cycle can go on longer, because one of the first things that ends training cycles for most natural athletes is actually it's not muscular, it's actually joint pain.
Orthopedic issues, absolutely.
When you're squatting 2 or 3 times a week in the 70 to 80% range, and that, I promise you, is what most IPF lifters are currently doing, the knees and elbow tendonitis tends to be the first thing that you have to take care of. So you have to be so much more proactive about keeping the joints healthy. Whereas if you're starting at 60% and squatting once a week, that doesn't become an issue for a really long time. So we've got the cycle extended on both sides, the mesocycle, and then each workout.
And less stress intermittent.
Yeah, so when I started to think about it after you said it, I said, that makes perfect sense, and it maps out to what you see in the real world as well, which is guys 100%. Are not reloading every fourth week unless you're talking about, the cube and 531. And but anyway, we're talking about intelligent programming,
and we're not gonna talk about that. Just trust me, we're not.
Yeah. So very interesting point there that I think is one I hadn't actually heard anybody say it before you, and when I thought about it, I was like, that's a great point that people need to hear. Surprisingly, we just whipped through that way faster than I had anticipated. But is there anything that you'd like that we missed that we should talk about before we end it here? Because we kind of went over frequency, volume, intensity, and mesocycle length. We hit that in about 15, 20 minutes.
There's maybe even one other thing I'll just throw on there. And again, this is a little bit of science and an awful lot of observation. Again, no besmirch to natural athletes. Like I said, I don't even know one, so I really can't speak overly ill of them. But one of the other major things, drugs, testosterone and anabolic steroids, by the way, they're not the same thing, folks, but androgens at large, one of the other things they tend to drive is that alpha-esque component of the psyche. They tend to drive the emotional capacity, motivation, etc., pain thresholds, pain tolerances, all those things. And so the perception on top of all the things we've talked about, then the perception of your momentary condition and fatigue is probably not the same. Again, giving the enhanced athlete a bigger window.
Yeah, great point. And obviously, I mean, I've heard you bring this up before in some of your Q&As where there's certain compounds that people prize for their side effects almost as much as their effects. You know,
absolutely.
Trenbolone comes to mind always first because it does kind of make you a psychopath. And being a raging
halotestin, Mibrolone, there's a slew of them that have been used over the years. I'm old enough to go all the way back to Mibrolone and testosterone suspension and Mibrolone, by the way, you might know it as check drops.
Yeah.
It was a liquid steroid applied under the tongue to drive horses into heat. It was powerful enough to make horses want to fuck. So
I have seen someone use it pre deadlift, so that was interesting. But I've also seen people do like pop 10 halos before their first squat and stuff. So there's some crazy stuff that goes on in the powerlifting world. But
absolutely,
that's another great point. Overall, though, I think we kind of covered everything that I really wanted to address. So I think
absolutely.
Maybe a quick summary might be, as far as the frequency thing goes, there's definitely, as you mentioned, a pharmacological basis for needing to train less often due to those muscle protein synthesis curves being extended from the actual drugs. And then on top of that, you're getting much, much larger athletes. Let's face it, much larger athletes, sometimes 50, 60 pounds more of lean body mass. And whenever that's the case, you're not going to be able to train as often just because of the damage done per workout. And then, that leads right into kind of what we said about intensity, where the performance-enhancing drugs can tend to extend the effective intensity.
Yep.
And you combine all of these things together, and what you get is mesocycle lengths that are longer, that start lower and higher. More progress is made more quickly. And I think the main thing that people really, really focus on is the frequency aspect. And it just doesn't seem to be as necessary or as effective, whether it's in practice or in theory, for enhanced athletes to train as frequently as naturals do.
Absolutely. I agree with that for every reason we've covered and more. But yeah, absolutely. That's pretty good synopsis of it. And interestingly, the more you introduce drugs into the conversation, the more the conversation actually tilts toward a kind of classic bro science, bro split kind of world. I sincerely don't prescribe to the bro science universe, but like stereotypes and like so many things, it exists for a reason. And the reason is the steps taken tend to lead you down that path.
And I think any time that you go too far down the path of dismissing anecdote, it ends up poorly, because anecdotes are still evidence. It's just not the most high quality evidence. But sometimes the weight of anecdote can be overwhelming. And and that is, we won't get into it because it's a whole nother video, but sometimes there are these natural guys that get their heads too far up PubMed and forget that the anecdotes do matter.
No matter how much he did wrong, Ronnie Coleman was still the biggest, best bodybuilder ever walked this fucking planet. So you can't entirely dismiss what took place.
And at the end of the day, it's just not clear from the literature, if that's the direction that you want to focus 100% of your efforts and focus on, what the differences are for somebody who's on 2 grams of anabolics and HGH and insulin, because nobody's going to study that. So that's
the big problem with the evidence-based people, is they want evidence that just literally legally and ethically can't exist. There's never, as you said, there's just never going to be any legitimate, organized data on that point. It's all going to be opinions of people like you and I. That's all there's going to ever be.
Yeah. And on that note, I mean, I think, we mentioned Dr. Mike as kind of one of the guys who's at the forefront of kind of designing training programs, talking about volume. Maybe Lyle's another guy that, for me, and I bet you feel the same way, is kind of at that forefront of nutrition. But I want to, for my viewers who are not as familiar with you, is I basically consider you on that same tier when it comes to pharmacology. you're the main person that I go
Thank
to
you.
for learning about pharmacology. And so if there's anybody out there, whether you're an enhanced athlete, maybe you're thinking about becoming an enhanced athlete one day, whether you work with enhanced athletes or you just like to learn about this stuff because you like the challenge, you're scientifically inclined, Broderick is a guy that you're going to want to check out his resources. He's got a ton of free ones, but you also have a member site over at Team Evil GSP if you want to talk about what's going on with that, because there's some pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, I so hate to be the commercial whore, but I guess I put so much time and effort into it, I need to at least say so. Yes, thank you. I do have a members section. In there, I'm archiving all the question and answers, both the ones I do publicly and the ones I do privately for the members. I have a feedback window where they can ask a specific question, and I do my best to answer it within the week they're asked, and then it's archived in the site. I have all of the work I've done, articles, videos, etc., in the site. And I now have a couple of contributing authors coming in, putting in separate articles, ranging from, I'm rather impressed with myself, ranging from OTC supplements all the way up to nutrition, both enhanced and not. So there's an awful lot of material there. I personally, I never trust it when someone else says these sorts of things, but I know I'm not lying. Literally, the reason I started this site was not to show off how smart I am, but to attract even smarter people so that I can learn more shit. I may be an expert, but I swear to you, the minute I put this phone down, I will be so frustrated about not knowing something, and I just want to attract those people so that I can find the answers. So my goal here is to make you a little smarter and make me a little smarter and make the whole thing just fucking better. I just want better. I want to see everyone squatting 1,000 pounds because it's just fucking awesome.
Yeah, and we have people doing it for nutrition and training, and it's about damn time that there's somebody with an actual science background in biology. And guys, by the way, this can't be overstated. Broderick has worked with multiple IFBB pros, people at the very top of the sport. This is not an armchair scientist, okay? If you have the goals and those types of aspirations, this is a guy who knows what he's doing, has actually done it. And again, he's got the respect of guys that you probably already have you respect. Dr. Mike Israel, Lyle McDonald, these are the guys that talk to him and ask his advice and his consultation on pharmacology. So I know he doesn't want to brag about himself, but I'm more than happy to do it. He's the guy you want to go to. I'm actually a member of the site. That should tell you what you need to know. He's helped me already with designing my protocols for my PEDs. So I couldn't give a better endorsement than that. Yeah, definitely check out his site if that's something that you are at all interested in. And on that note, I do kind of want to segue into some of the stuff that I'm doing here. And I did mention, some of you know this, some of you may not, but I have recently kind of made the switch personally from training naturally, which I did for 10 years. And I'm 28, so but please don't, think that I'm trying to convince anyone to do it at 16 like Broderick might have. It might work out for you, but I'm definitely not giving you any medical recommendations here. However, if you would like to see exactly what I'm doing, I'm logging everything with blood work, putting down exactly what I'm doing, and giving some transparency to this whole thing. Because when I first started looking into this, there was not a guy like Broderick out there putting up good information. You were literally limited to like going to forums with names like getbig.com and listening to unscrupulous internet figures like GH15 and random guys that supposedly have the truth. But we're finally getting somebody out there who has got a scientific background to give real solid information on how to learn more about this stuff. And if that's something that you're interested in, you want to see it in practice, on my new website, which is izzynarvez.com, I'm logging everything that I'm doing and putting out information on those subjects as well. So again, if you're a natural athlete looking for powerlifting coaching, that's still something I'm doing. I've worked with over 200 athletes that have done the same thing. And if you're one of those individuals who is looking either to learn or even need a direct consultation because you're at a high level of the sport, Broderick is going to be your guy. And I think with that said, unless there's anything else you'd like that we missed that you'd like to address really quick, I think that's where we're going to leave off.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw 1 minute, 2 minutes on the end, just partly because I'm a little creeped out because you put that much icing on me. I'm not accustomed to that, but quite literally to the listening public out there, this is the scenario that led to this video and this conversation. I'm trying to get my paid member site up to speed. I'm struggling with the technological learning curve, and I'm going down the checklist of people that have been generous enough to pay me $10, and I see this name, and I'm like, I know that name, and I'm like, that's the Powerlifting to Win guy. And I was like, holy shit, that guy's giving me money. And I literally reached out to him because I actually, in my ignorance of naturals, literally have referenced Izzy's work to try and get some context to communicate with the few rare naturals that I do come in contact with. So before this conversation ever came to be, I kind of felt the exact same way about Izzy in terms of, well, there's a guy who scientifically, systematically is explaining the natural universe. So I kind of feel, at least in practice, if not in absolute application, we're equal and opposite, as it were. So I really want everyone to know I feel exactly the same way about Izzy, and if you have any intention of making your way through this world unenhanced, he and Lyle McDonald and a handful of other people are the people you really need to focus on. And I mean focus, because there is so much just garbage out there. Just as there is in the world of drugs, there's just as much in the world of naturalness-ism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so one more time, I just want to encourage everybody that if you enjoyed this interview, what either of us had to say, head on over to teamevilgsp.com, and I'm going to put links in the description box. I'm going to put information here in the video. Check out Broderick's stuff. Like I said, I'm actually a member, so I happen to know that there's new content going up every single week, multiple pieces of content, high-level stuff that you can learn about, whether you want to learn about peptides or anabolics or training, periodization. It actually runs the gamut over there on his website. And I can actually tell you the same thing. My new project at izzynarvez.com, I'm putting out a training log daily of all the training that I do, everything that I take and eat. And I'm also doing new content for form, technique, and programming. So both of us have content coming out all the time. If you like what we have to say, if you think we're relatively intelligent guys worth listening to, check out our sites. Again, teamevilgsp.com. I'm a member. You should be too. And then izzynarvez.com is my new project, and that's where you're going to find all of my content going forward. So a big thank you to Broderick for joining me here. I feel like this was a great discussion, and we got a lot of misconceptions, I believe, cleared up, and really some novel points that I don't think you've heard elsewhere, or at least not too frequently, especially that mesocycle point. And with that said, thank you guys all for listening to us, and hopefully we'll be interacting with you elsewhere in our little universes. So have a great day, everybody.
Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you do want more content, please check out teamevilgsp.com to see Broderick stuff, and you can find more of my content over at izzynarvez.com. Links will be in the description box. And once again, thanks for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the content, and Broderick and I hope to do more in the future. Peace.